We suggest, however, that when Jesus is born in the flesh, he gives up some of the godly prerogatives so he can really live like one of us. I hear people say sometimes, well, Jesus knew everything that was going to happen. He knew about his crucifixion. He knew who was going to betray him. He knew all the course of his life. My brothers and sisters, but Jesus knew all those things. He didn't live and dwell among us, as John tells us he did. If John is right, and he became flesh and dwelt among us, and I believe that with all my heart, then we can think about what this life tells us, not just what the sweet details of the nativity are. If John is right, then the baby in the manger goes through the terrible tube. He stamps his foot and tells his mother Mary, no. He probably does that to Joseph as well. I suspect Jesus got his fair share of time out and maybe a few swats on the behind. Now, he became a truculent teenager. He tried to keep secrets from Mary and Joseph in that small town in Nazareth, and as best he could, everybody knew what he was doing, but he kept his secret. And I am sure he sat at the dinner table more than one night and answered their questions about how his day had gone with a grunt and a barely understandable word. Jesus was a truculent teenager, and as he grew into manhood, he, like so many of us, struggled with who he was and what his place in the world was. Scripture tells us that he was 30 years old before he began his ministry. He didn't immediately start out at 21 on the path he was to follow. And Mark's Gospel, which is the first Gospel to be written, tells us that his path did become clear to him and it was baptism. John, when the dove comes down and he hears the voice of God. Yes, Jesus struggled like we struggle with who we are and what our place in the world is. And once he set out on that path, he met all the challenges we need in life. You see, Pharisees and scribes were constantly popping up to try to challenge him and catch him in some theological difficulty. And sometimes the very people he ministered to wanted to get rid of him. Scripture tells us that once the crowd was sort of throwing off the edge of a mountain, and Scripture also tells us that when he healed that demoniac in the region of the Gerasenes, that the crowd asked him to leave. He was causing too much trouble. And then when he finally makes his way into Jerusalem, he endures the betrayal of his friends. First, Judas sells him out for 30 pieces of silver, and then Peter. Peter, his closest friend, perhaps amongst the apostles, denies him 3 times. And that night before his crucifixion, he kneels in real human agony and fear and says, if you be willing, let this cup pass from my lips. But the cup doesn't pass. And when he hangs on the cross, his friends have fled. Only a few women are there with him. And he cries out in real human agony, my God, why have you forsaken me? Yes, this baby is a real human. And that baby becomes a human being that lives and struggles and meets life's challenges just like we do. That's part of the good news in John's Gospel. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. But the wonderful news, the Gospel in today's reading, is the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness doesn't overcome it. Jesus comes into the world to live as a human being, and despite all that the world throws at him, he remains the person committed to service, committed to love, committed to following a path and showing a way that is different than the world's way. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness never overcame it. The King James Version offers a slightly different translation of that phrase. It says, the darkness did not comprehend it, and that's our issue today. So often, the world doesn't understand the light. They want to keep focused on the baby, the sweet, accessible baby, and forget that the light shines in the world all the time. Recently, a friend of mine bought a new computer, And she went to Best Buy, to the Geek Squad, to get some instruction on the new operating system. And if you have not used Windows 8, you don't, I can't imagine the challenges it presents. And she was there waiting for her appointment, and a man came in with his computer clutched in his hand with the cord trailing out behind him, clearly frantic and clearly stressed. And my friend looked at him and said, "Wow, looks like you're having some problems." And he said, "Oh, yes. And she said, "You know, my appointment is the next one. Why don't you take my appointment? Because I bet it's a little difficult for you to get back during the week." And the man looked at her unbelievingly and said, "Yeah, you're right, it is hard. Are you sure?" And she said, yeah, I can come back during the week. Why don't you take my appointment and get your problem solved?" And the man thanked her profusely, unbelieving that she would give him her 15-minute appointment with the Geek Squad. And as she walked away, the man said, "Wow, that's what the spirit of this season is. That's the spirit of Christmas." My friend resisted trying to say to him, No, that's not the spirit of Christmas. This is the spirit of Christ. Christ is alive in the world today. The light shines in the darkness, John tells us, and the darkness neither comprehends it nor overcomes it. That, my brothers and sisters, is what John's gift is to us today. To tell us that the Word became flesh, dwelt among us. And that light, the light that is in every one of us, the Christ light, shines in the darkness not just this Christmas morning, but every day of our lives. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness 2,000 years later has not overcome the light. Thanks be to God. Let us stand and affirm our faith in the words of the 19th Creed. We believe in one God, the Father,